Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and very good morning to the class. Well, what I'm going to discuss with you today is on the subject of accounting system for profit distribution, in particular with reference to Islamic financial institution business. Now, when we talk about Islamic financial institution businesses, okay, I'm always referring to banking businesses, right? When you need to operate Islamic financial business, it may not be necessarily for you to set up a bank, okay? You can always operate an investment house or discount house or finance companies, okay? Now, even with leasing company, you can still operate financial business using the Islamic way of handling the business transaction, right? So what I'm going to cover with you today is, firstly, on the underlying concepts, okay? On the underlying concept, of Islamic business, okay? Now, how Islamic financial business differs to those that are being handled under the conventional system. So can you read from the back? Is it clear? All right. Now, when we talk about concept of Islamic business, okay, in particular Islamic financial business, the concern of Islamic financial transaction is to avoid whatever factors that are prohibited in Islam, right? And I'm not intending to teach you about Islamic religion, but just to teach you on how to exploit the teaching of Islam in the current business environment. Okay? Now, the first concept, underlying concept of the operation of Islamic financial transaction is that to avoid the elements of al-riba. Okay? And what is al-riba? It is simply interest. Okay? Interest element. Now, how do you define interest element? Of course, something in short or extra in lieu of an exchange. Okay? Oh, sorry, an exchange. Something extra or in short in lieu of an exchange. So, for example, okay, if you transact an exchange between RM1 coin with RM1 notes, so the exchange that has taken place must be of an equivalent value. So $1 coin must be exchanged with $1 note. The reason is simply because money, okay, money is a ribawi item. So when it is a ribawi item, you are not allowed to exchange the commodities, okay, in different value, okay. But of course, you can have an exchange of goods or other commodities with different values. So, as for the ribawi item, we'll discuss in the next session, okay. Now, the next concept which we are concerned with here is the concept of, the first one, interest, okay. The second concept is the concept of al-gharar, okay. Now, what is the principle of al-gharar? Al-gharar simply refers to ambiguity. So, any financial dealing or business dealing in Islam must be transparent. The exchange that is being dealt with by the traders must be objective. So if you weigh a certain good, you must be weighing it in objective manner. So if it is for 2 kilo, then you have to weigh for 2 kilo exactly, okay? 2 kilos exactly. So principle of ambiguity. The next principle which we are concerned under the Islamic financial transaction or Islamic business is the concept of al-maisir. Okay? The principle of al-maisir is referring to gambling activities. So since gambling activities is forbidden in Islam, we have to avoid any nature of gambling activities in its business. And lastly, of course, not al-mari, okay? It is al-forbidden. So can we use al-forbidden as a concept? What do you think? Can we or can we? Anybody? Anybody? Oli, can you answer that? Can. Why not? A Muslim can always marry a European, isn't it? So al is coming up from the Arabic word. So an Arab can always marry a European. But of course they have to convert first. Now, al-forbidden is simply relate to activities which is not in line with the teaching of Islam, such as to finance the activities of pornographic activities. So that kind of business activities could not be financed, okay, or could not be dealt with by the Muslim, okay, since it is forbidden. Now, after discussing the concept, the underlying concept of the operation of Islamic business, we shall now move on to the underlying principle in the architecturing of the technology for the distribution of profit created from the business based on Islamic principles. Okay? So what are those underlying principles that we need to be concerned of when starting to design or architecturing the accounting system for the profit distribution? Firstly, now the concern about Islamic financial dealing or any Islamic financial business is to obey the obey and satisfying Allah in the financial or business dealing. So the command of Allah need to be observed, okay, prior to constructing the technology for distribution of profit. Now, as compared to the conventional method, the concern is simply to satisfying the users, isn't it? To satisfying the users in the affairs of financial dealings. So you see the superiority of the consideration in erecting the system for profit distribution of financial business in Islam. Secondly, the creation of standards, okay, is to comply with the principle of Sharia. Those are for the system to tailor for the requirement of Islamic financial institution. Whereas, as for the conventional, the creation of standard is to comply with the man-made law. Now, thirdly, the concern is with the profit and loss sharing mechanism under the Islamic business, while as for the conventional, the concern is simply on the interest as benefit to the depositors as well as to those who will benefit from the financing activities of the institution. And last but not least, the focus is on profit sharing under the Islamic financial environment, which is construed as collective in perspective. While as for the conventional, the concern is viewed as individualistic in perspective, of which you only concern with the return on investment. Right? So those are the underlying principles that you need to consider when developing the system for profit distribution of an Islamic financial institution. Right? So after looking at the underlying concept for the operation of the business, and after considering the postulates or the principle for the development of the system in distributing the profit arising from the business, we should now look at the sources, sources of the operation of business, as well as the application of the sources in creating the profit, and how to enlarge the spectrum of business so as to enable us to create a good size of profit so as to satisfy everybody's need, in sharing the wealth from that business. Okay? Now, if you look, take an example of financial institution. Okay? So if you look at the operation of a financial institution operating on Islamic basis. Now, what are the sources to the institution prior to generating the asset for the business? Of course, those are the funds contributed by the members of public, isn't it? Therefore, we can say that the sources of funds for the institution includes the equity contributed by the shareholders of the institution. Apart from the equity, what else that you can think of? Fariza, can you answer that? Or are you dreaming?
I'm trying to think.
What's that?
I'm trying to think of the answer.
Okay. The girls next to you, Fariza? You are smiling away. Maybe you are thinking of your grandfather at home. Is that right? Can you think of any other avenues of generating the fund for Islamic financial institution? Well, maybe in the form of deposit contributed by depositors, isn't it? So, equity contributed by the shareholders of the institution. Deposits are those funds contributed by depositors to the institution. And in addition to that, are the commissions charged by the bank in lieu of the services provided by the institution. Service charge, commission, or whatever other fees imposed by the institution. And last but not least, probably the sale of debt. Okay, debt is an asset, and if you can use that debt by liquidating it, it may bring in source to the institution that can be exploited and be used for creating the asset of the institution. Now, those are the avenues as to how to generate funds for the institution. Now, the ability of an institution to mobilize funds is not enough in ensuring the growth of the institution. Okay? That kind of activities are not sufficient to ensure in upholding the principle of ongoing concern of a business entity. And as such, you need to look for other avenues in extending the fund in creating the asset, and from that asset, then only you can generate the profit from the business. So what are those assets? How are those sources of funds be used in creating the asset of the institution? Of course, it includes the cash in deal. Okay? So, being a financial institution, the nature of its business is by having the fund, part of the fund, okay? A small portion of those source of fund that you have mobilized as the stock in trade. And that fund is placed as cash in deal, okay? To meet the requirement of the demands of the account holders, okay? Now, apart from cash in deal, of course, you have to allocate a certain portion of the fund as statutory reserve, okay? And this portion of fund is required by statutory, by the law, okay? If you operate financial business. But of course, you have other kind of deposit if you involve in other sectors of industries, okay? Now, when we talk about financial business, the current rate of statutory reserve that you need to place with Bank Negara is somewhat around 10%, okay? 10%. So you have to allocate 10% of the total funds available with Bank Negara. You have to bank in with an account with Bank Negara Malaysia, the Central Bank of Malaysia, okay? So that is the requirement of law. Apart from that fund, you still need to keep aside another small portion, which is somewhat around 5% above the statutory reserve. 5% above the statutory reserve, which means in total, the statutory reserve together with the liquidity reserve will be 15%. So, in addition to that statutory reserve, 5% will be placed as liquidity reserve. And this liquidity reserve is simply meant for use by the institution when the institution has run out of liquidity to meet the demand of the depositors. Okay? So those are the money or funds that you need to keep aside, which may not generate a good income to the institution. Because if you place the amount with Bank Negara as statutory reserve, it brings nothing to the institution as a profit. Okay? But as far as liquidity fund is concerned, it brings a very minimum profit. Maybe 1 or 2% out of what you have placed with Bank Negara as the liquidity reserve. Alright? And the rest, you can use that in creating the assets of the business. Because the creation of assets will only generate the profit for the institution. So what are the avenues in order for you to generate or to create the asset? Of course, in the activities of equity financing, in the activities of debt financing, or in the activities of trade financing. So trade financing is actually an asset to the institution. The equity financing are also equity financing activities are also the asset to the institution, as well as the debt financing activities. And apart of that, if you have any other extra amount available, you can extend that for currency exchange activities or investment activities. Okay? Now, these strategies that need to be used by the institution in order to maximize the profit. Okay? Of course, through optimizing the use of the available fund in creating the asset. So, in other words, you try to use up to the maximum that you can, and the remaining you can always put it under Treasury Department for them to manage it In other words, for them to use it in exchanges activities, monetary exchanges activities, or the currency exchanges activities. Okay? Now, we have already discussed the underlying concept for the operation of Islamic financial business. We have also discussed the postulates or the principles that need to be considered when architecturing the technology for profit distribution of an Islamic financial institution. Now, we look at the how the profit is being distributed by the institution to its depositors, shareholders, and other interested parties to the wealth of the institution. Okay? Now, in order to each and every one of you in the class, I should now elaborate the operation of distribution in the form of chart. Okay? Chart. Now, if you look at the operation of an Islamic financial business, you can see that the avenues of mobilization of funds, as has been elaborated earlier, are through their deposit account. So, when we talk about financial business, the avenues include current account. Okay? Current account. What else? Saving account. Then, apart from saving account, you may have also investment account, isn't it? Investment account. And this is the first category. Okay? The first category of pool of funds in the whole system of the financial institution. The second category is the equity, the shareholders' fund. And the last classification is the special or specific. You can call it special or specific fund. Now, then, how does this fund be used for the creation of assets of the institution? As has been mentioned to you, a portion of it goes to statutory reserve, the other portion goes to liquidity reserve, and then the rest are channeled to investment assets, okay? Including equity financing, then debt financing activities, and investment activities. The same goes for